Hello and welcome students to the class of business statistics. So till now we have already discussed about measure of central tendency where we have to calculate a central part of data set which represents all the data. Okay. Now we will calculate the measure of dispersion. Now whatever data you are getting, you don't know if the data is error free or not. It may be possible that that data is containing some kind of errors. So it is the duty, or I can say it is the part of measure of dispersion where it can detect all the errors which is present in the data. So dispersion is a state of getting dispersed or spread. So basically how much your data is spreading on the graph. Statistical dispersion means the extent to which numerical data is likely to vary about an average value. In other words, dispersion helps to understand the distribution of the data. In statistics, the measure of dispersion helps to interpret the variability of the data. That is, to know how much homogeneous or heterogeneous the data is. In simple terms, it shows how squeezed or scattered the variable is. So basically, in the diagram, you can see a graph and how much the data is dispersing, which is represented by the different lines of different colors. As you can see, the green line, the dispersion is very less. Then the red line, it is more dispersed than green. Then the blue line, it is the highly dispersed. So how much dispersion is getting in the graph, the it is observing by the measure of dispersion. Now, there are two types of measure of dispersion. First is absolute measure of dispersion, second one is relative measure of dispersion. Now, first is absolute. In this, the measure of dispersion contains the same unit as the original data set. The absolute dispersion method expresses the variation in terms of the average of deviations of observations, like standard or means deviation. It includes range, standard deviation, quartile deviation, and etc. Now, there are various types of absolute measure of dispersion. Let's start. First is range. Now, what is range? It is simply the difference between the maximum value and the minimum value given in a data set. Just for example, if there is some values given in the question like 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, and you have to calculate the range. How will you calculate it? So just subtract the highest number and the lowest number, that is 7 and 1. So 7 minus 1, 6. 6 is the range. Then comes to variance. The term variance refers to a statistical measurement of the spread between numbers in a data set. More specifically, variance measures how far each number in the set is from the mean, and thus from every other number in the set. Deduct the mean from each data in the set, square each of them and add each square, and finally divide them by the total number of values in the data set to get the variance. Now there are two kind of variances. First is population variances, second one is sample variances. Population variance is generally denoted by sigma square, and the formula is summation of x minus mu whole square divided by n. For the sample variance, it is s square. S square is equal to summation of x minus x bar and divided by n minus 1. So generally we apply the formula for sample variance because according to the t-test, or I can say chi-test, the population should be greater than 30. So the observations should be at least more than 30 for a particular population variance. So if we are not having that kind of population, then we will just simply apply the sample variance formula. Then standard deviation. Standard deviation is the square root of variance is known as the standard deviation. So whenever we are applying the formula for variance and calculating it, after getting a value as an answer, just square root it. After getting the square root, that value is standard deviation. So there is a relation between variance and standard deviation. Next is quartiles and quartile deviation. So quartiles are the values that divide a list of numerical data into three quarters, such as Q1, Q2, and Q3. The quartiles are values that divide a list of numbers into quarters The quartile deviation is half of the distance between the third and the first quartile. Then the mean deviation. Mean deviation is a measure of central tendency. We can calculate it from arithmetic mean, median or mode. It shows us how far are all the observations from the middle on average. Each deviation is an absolute deviation as it is an absolute value, which implies that we ignore the negative signs. Also, the deviations on both the sides of mean shall be equal. Now, relative measure of dispersion. So, whatever we are calculating in absolute dispersion, you just have to find the coefficient of that. So, after finding the coefficient, that is the relative measure of dispersion. Basically, calculating it in the form of percentage, that how much percentage of error is presenting in the data set. So the relative measure of dispersion are used to compare the distribution of two or more data sets. This measure compares values without units. So the common relative dispersion methods include coefficient of range, and there is a formula. So maximum minus minimum value divided by maximum plus minimum values. Then coefficient of standard deviation. Whenever you are calculating it, so after putting the value of standard deviation and divide it by mean, that is coefficient of standard deviation. Then quartile deviation, that is Q3 minus Q1 divided by Q3 plus Q1. And the last one is mean deviation. So mean deviation divided by the mean, or I can say the average. Now, let's see a question of range firstly. So, we have to find the range of given observations. Firstly, just arrange the data sets or arrange the data value in the ascending order. After arranging it in ascending order, you just have to find out the largest and the lowest number. So, the lowest number is 23 and the largest is 54. So subtract those two values. So after subtracting 54 minus 23, 31. So 31 is your range. Now applying the coefficient formula, that is maximum minus minimum divided by maximum plus minimum. So after applying the formula, you will get the 0.402. That is the coefficient of range. Then in the grouped data, last question was the form in the form of ungrouped data. Now we are having a question in the grouped data, that is class interval and frequencies. For that, it is also simple, that just subtract the lowest class interval from the highest class interval. So in this question, the highest class interval is 80 and the lowest is 10. So 80 minus 10, that is 70. And coefficient of range is, again the formula is same, maximum minus minimum divided by maximum plus minimum. After applying that, 0.77, so that is your coefficient. So whenever you are solving the coefficient of any deviation, you will always get the answer in the form of 0 point and something. Okay. Next is variance. So again, variance is also divided into two, ungrouped data and grouped data, and the formulas are quite different. So for the variance of ungrouped data, firstly we have the question. Then firstly we will calculate the mean of the data. After calculating the mean, it is 8. Then after applying the formula. In the formula, we need the value of x, we need the value of mean x bar, and then we need the value of n, that is number of observations. So we have to create three columns. So we have to create columns. First, we have to create a column and write all the values of x. After that, we will subtract each value of x with its mean, which we have already calculated, that is 8. So for the first value, it is 5 minus 8, that is minus 3. Then the second value, 12. 12 minus 8, that is 4. This is how you are going to calculate all the values of x minus x bar. Then you have to square the values due to formula. So it is x minus x bar whole square. After getting all the values, then you have to square it. So 3 into 3, 9. 4 into 4, 16. This is how you are going to square it. After squaring all the values, then you have to add these values and then get a sum. So it is 194. and the number of observation n is 8. So put all these values in the formula and then you will get your answer as 27.71. After getting the variance, as I have already told you, there is a relation between variance and standard deviation. So under root of variance is a standard deviation. Now we are getting the value of variance as 27.71. After under root this value, we are getting 5.26. That is the standard deviation. After that, again, you have to calculate the coefficient of standard deviation. The formula is standard deviation divided by mean. So after applying the formula, you will get 0.65. That is your coefficient of mean. Thank you.